Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum. We are so delighted to have everyone join us virtually from all across the region and also beyond to come together for 3 days of exciting workshops, plenaries, and interactive discussion on internet governance. We have been to different corners of our vast and diverse region, from Vanuatu in the Pacific to Vladivostok in the far east of Russia, and next year, hopefully, we will be all in mountainous Nepal. This year, our very own APrIGF Multistakeholder Steering Group is our official host, and we are using the very platform we care very deeply about, the internet, to participate in a virtual and interactive way. We encourage an open, inclusive, and respectful environment here at APrIGF, and all participants are reminded to follow the code of conduct posted in the chat window. Our opening plenary features an esteemed panel of speakers who will set the scene with their opening remarks. And after this, we'll have a timely and thought-provoking plenary roundtable titled Dealing with a Pandemic in a Digital Era. First up, we have Mr. Rajnesh Singh. He is the chair of the Asia Pacific Regional IGF Multi-Stakeholder Steering Group and the regional vice president for the Asia Pacific at the Internet Society. Raj, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you all joining in. And I could see from the chat window that we've got a number of people from outside the region, so we really appreciate you joining in. Obviously, this is the first time that the Asia Pacific Regional IGF is going to be held virtually, and that in itself, I think, has an advantage. I know there's the disadvantage that we cannot meet face to face, and we cannot interact in the manner that we normally do at physical events. But one thing that the virtual event does do, of course, is it gets rid of the tyranny of visas and border controls. As anyone who's been involved in these sort of events knows, we spend a lot of time and effort trying to resolve visa issues from various countries. So at least in one way, this really opens up the participation to not just people who could perhaps not make it to physical events, but as well as people from other parts of the world. As Jennifer rightly pointed out, it's quite fitting that we are using the internet itself to do this event. After all, we are the Regional Internet Governance Forum, and we are talking about internet governance issues. So now then, I think using the thing we talk about is perhaps welcome. The reason, of course, we've gone virtual this year, and this is the 11th year we're holding this event, is because of the pandemic. Now, I will not get into talking about the pandemic. We've got a great panel discussion coming up, and I think a lot of people are probably a bit tired now of hearing about COVID and pandemic in just about every second sentence. What I will say, however, is that the internet itself has proved to be very resilient. There were lots of fears and concerns early on that the internet would not be able to cope with whatever the effects of the pandemic would be, with social restrictions and work from home and learning from home and other things. That's not been the case. The core infrastructure, of course, has held up really well. There have been some issues here and there with applications and services, but on the whole, I think we've done quite well. That brings me to just the one single point I would like to make. Now, the other advantage, of course, of having these virtual events is that there are no long, boring speeches. And I promise I will not give you a long, boring speech. We've tried to keep each of the opening speakers to just a couple of minutes. So we can get on with the business of the day, which is the panel discussion, of course, which will be interesting. So the thing I did want to say, of course, is that, the reason that we've been able to have some semblance of normal life is because the internet has been there. The first thing people turned to was the internet to try and see what we can do, be it keep businesses running, keep kids learning from home, keep work going, and so on. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the internet itself today sometimes appears to come at a threat from many perspectives. So it's, I think, upon all of us to ensure that the internet remains open, it remains accessible, it remains affordable, it remains trusted. Because once we lose any of those values, I think we are going to be in really big trouble. The other great thing about the internet is that it allows us to connect virtually to anyone, anywhere. And I think keeping that connectivity part of the internet in play, that internetworking bit in play is really, really important. And I think, again, the effects of the pandemic hold testament to that. So with that, I hope everyone enjoys the next couple of days. We've got a great lineup of speakers. We've got some great content. Please do stay engaged with the Asia Pacific Regional IGF. We are the world's largest region. So you'll hear a lot of diverse voices, diverse opinions, but that's the beauty about the internet, isn't it? It brings together people from all views and points of views and places and lines of thought and so on together to discuss, debate, and of course, dialogue. So with that, welcome, a very warm welcome to the beautiful Asia Pacific. And I hope you remain connected with us as we go on with this event, but as well as into the future. Again, thank you very much. And back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Raj, for that wonderful opening. Next up, we have Ms. Anriette Esterhuysen. She's the chair of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. The MAG's purpose is to advise the UN Secretary General on the program and schedule of the annual Global Internet Governance Forum meetings. We are thrilled to have you. You have the floor, Anriette.
Thank you very much, Jennifer and Raj and everyone else. It's really an honor to be included. Apologies if my connection isn't very good or my camera quality isn't very good. I'm actually in the far eastern part of South Africa at the moment, near the border of Mozambique in a rural area. Well, there's not a lot to say. I think, as Raj has said, this topic has been discussed at length, but I think it is, particularly in the light of the theme of the Asia Pacific IGF this year, looking at norms and standards, just to share a few reflections. I think the two primary ones, I think, are, as Raj has said, the power of the internet has gained greater recognition at the moment, I think, than it's had for a long time. And in fact, the discussion has really shifted towards the positive impacts of the internet as opposed to the harmful ones, which in the last few years we've been quite preoccupied with. But I think we've also seen the impact of inequality, with the internet playing such a vital role in people being able to carry on working, accessing education, connect with their communities, children connecting with friends. The divide between those that have access and those that don't have access, I think, has stood out even more starkly than it usually does. And I think that really brings us to a realization that we have to address this divide. We have to find ways of creating connectivity for everyone to access on their own terms and through their own means. I think the other observation, which we possibly don't talk about enough, is just that this pandemic has demonstrated to us that the world is unpredictable, and that the sense of control over technology and the power that it gives us is one that I think we also need to reflect on. We need resilience through our technology, but we also need resilience at other levels, in terms of social organization, in terms of communities being able to help one another, in terms of states being accountable to their citizens, as opposed to just being accountable for remaining in power. For us as a human society to be able to face these types of unpredicted events, although some people would say this was predicted. I think the other reflection has been that the assumption that rich countries are better at dealing with this type of crisis than poor countries, for example, is one that the pandemic has questioned. Countries like Vietnam, for example, have dealt much better with the pandemic than a country like the United States. And the challenges of a pandemic of this nature affects different countries in different ways. But I think definitely the assumption that if you are considered a country with a high GDP or with a high level of development, looking at it through the conventional lens, that's not necessarily going to give you the answers of how to deal with something like this. What is important is having coordination, having rapid reactions, And I think very important, having the trust of your citizens in order to be able to respond as a government or as a public sector to a crisis like this. I think just to close, this is a moment for us to reflect. I think
we may have just caught the end of Anriette's intervention, but we really do thank her for joining us. She did mention there was a little bit of an instability with her connection. We thank her very much for joining at such an early hour. I think it might be 6 for her in the morning. Next up, we have Mr. Edmon Chung. He is the CEO of DotAsia organization and also the head of the Secretariat for APrIGF. Edmon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Anriette, as well as Raj. Welcome, everyone, to the 11th APrIGF and our first APrIGF virtual, which also actually marks our 10-year anniversary. At DotAsia, we are very proud to serve as Secretariat for the APrIGF since its inception in 2010. We greatly appreciate and the continued support from the community, especially our sponsors who have been supporters of APrIGF for many years. And we hope for many more, including APNIC, Internet Society, ICANN, APTLD, and IGFSA. We hope that they will be here for good. And at DotAsia, we will work very hard to be here for good for the community as well, which reverberates with this year's overarching theme, Internet Governance for Good. In the midst of COVID, as Raj and Anriette also mentioned, and the lockdowns, especially here in Hong Kong, where DotAsia is, for better or worse, we have been given a front row seat to really greater movements and challenges in a global fight, which reminds us that we cannot take the free and open internet for granted at all. So in this new normal, as new norms, standards, and mechanisms for internet governance are being set, the lively discussion here and everywhere in the global IGF movement, I believe, is very important. Many have questioned about the value of IGF and the IGFs around the world. And I recently come across a really interesting quote from George Orwell's 1984, which I want to share and seems curiously relevant. It goes, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the past controls the future, if for nothing else, perhaps the preservation of the discussions and debates when we still believe in the possibility for privacy and we still have a freedom of expression on an uncensored internet is in itself already an important part of the value of IGF. So as Secretariat, we here at DotAsia will continue to strive to faithfully record this piece of history, but it is the participation from everyone that is ultimately important to make these records meaningful. We will also strive to keep APrIGF open to all who are interested in internet governance in Asia Pacific, irrespective of national boundaries. In the wake of COVID, we know that we are interdependent beyond borders. Finally, let me wholeheartedly thank my wonderful team. In these difficult times, the team has really stepped up big time for this year's APrIGF. I can tell you that we are really having all hands on deck here at DotAsia, along with some extra help from ISOC Hong Kong, ISOC New York, and with Nepal, our original host for this year, hosting Zoom rooms, acting as Zoom ninjas, manning social media accounts, and many other coordination, technical, and logistics work in front and behind the scenes. Of course, the great work from Christine Orr, which many of you know, who leads our team in APrIGF efforts, and Jennifer, who is our MC today and oversees our work in internet governance. But this year, it has truly been a full team effort at DotAsia, and I'm forever grateful and indebted to the dedication of the team that made me look good here. So please do feel free to connect with the APrIGF and DotAsia Secretariat team you see in the upcoming sessions, should you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas for improvement as well. With this, I thank you once again for joining us at the APrIGF, and I wish everyone a fruitful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmon. And finally, we have Ms. Jenna Fung. She is the coordinator of the Asia Pacific Youth IGF and Hong Kong Youth IGF. The Youth Forum is a key and integral part of every APrIGF, and the youth participants will be joining us at all the upcoming sessions as well. This year, the YIGF was hosted last weekend, and Jenna will give you all the key highlights and exciting developments from our youth. Jenna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jennifer, and all the speakers. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today, speaking on behalf of the organizing committee of the Youth IGF for the third year. Engaging youth in internet governance community is challenging. Engaging youth remotely and completely virtually is even harder. Our world has turned upside down by COVID-19. Imagine if this pandemic never happened. We would have been gathered in Kathmandu, being busy for the meeting during the day and enjoying momos during the evening. But without this critical circumstance, we wouldn't have been able to take out any regional YIGF to the next level. We are delighted to be able to invite speakers from different regions, including youth speakers, to discuss the topic of privacy, cybersecurity, and misinformation during COVID-19 with all our youth participants. It was very engaging and interesting to hold a session that gathered youth leaders from all around the world, including representatives from the Youth Coalitions on Internet Governance, Eurodig, African YIGF, NetMission, and Youth for IG to inspire our participants to think about the next step of their own journey in internet governance. This year, we held the YIGF 1 week parallel to the main event in order to get them more prepared before attending this meeting. We have received over 100 valid registrations from different economies, including Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, South Korea, and Vietnam. We are proud to see most of our youth participants are taking the next step to stay engaged in this IG community after joining our virtual camp, not only by attending APrIGF or adding the comments on the synthesis document only, but getting out their comfort zone to take a real role in our community by taking part in youth initiative in their local community, such as being the organizing committee of their YIGF in their countries. Youth may not have 20 years of experience in working in the industry, but we have 20 years of experience in living in the digital world with the influence of the internet. Our world has changed, and for sure, we all are heading to a new normal after the pandemic. Empowering young people with the capacity we believe they might need or the way they have to be might no longer be the most important task nowadays. What's more important is to embrace the creativity with the experiences and power of all people to make positive changes in our community together. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the MSG, APrIGF Secretariat, DotAsia organization, and Youth Ambassador of the NetMission program, and all the partners who collaborate with us this year. Without your great support, we wouldn't have been able to have such a great time. I wish a great success for APrIGF 2020 and a productive week for everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you to all our esteemed speakers for your opening remarks. You have all given us a lot to look forward to in the next 3 days. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for the plenary roundtable titled, Dealing with a Pandemic in a Digital Era. Mr. Jordan Carter is the Chief Executive of InternetNZ. InternetNZ is the home of the .nz country code top-level domain for New Zealand. They also organize NetHui, an annual community event for discussing the internet. Mr. Jordan Carter, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jen. Kia ora, everyone, and welcome to this exciting and quite timely panel discussion, dealing with a pandemic in a digital era. And the starting point for me in thinking about this was, imagine if we had to do COVID without the internet. If you just think about that and the implications of what it would mean for our economic lives, our working, our education, our socializing, our healthcare, and so on, all of the things we rely on, and how that would have gone without the physical movement and without the online world that we've come to inhabit, and which this APrIGF is making amazing use of. it would be impossible to imagine in any great detail. Just speaking briefly about New Zealand's experience here, all of the themes that were coming through in the introductory setup, the description for this panel, are visible. The digital inclusion challenges of kids in households without internet access trying to do education during the pandemic was just one example. And I'm sure that from all around the region, there are stories like this to share. And so I don't have any great profound opening insights to offer, but I will invite you to think about the questions that you'd like to ask any of our speakers. If you pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen as we go, that would be great. When we come to the Q&A time, I'll try and alternate between written questions and people who want to put their hand up and make a video or audio intervention. And we'll try and distribute the questions fairly. I'm not going to give long introductions either to our speakers, and I'm just going to run through each in the order that they were presented. So our first speaker today is Miss Audrey Tang. Audrey, over to you.
Hello, really happy to be here. It's my second APrIGF, but the first digital one. It's your first digital one as well. I just want to make sure that the sound is getting through okay. It is. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm from the Government Stakeholder Group as the Digital Minister of Taiwan, a transcultural republic of citizens. And as Anriette mentioned in the beginning, trusting the citizens, trust of the citizens, between the citizens is really the most important thing. But on the other hand, since ancient times, the way to counter a pandemic has been to increase distance between people, like closing country borders, locking down, stopping gathering, and so on. And the increase in the distrust in society seems almost inevitable. But however, during the fight here in Taiwan against the pandemic, we used the idea of open government, which is in itself a co-gov model of the co-governance model inspired by internet governance, to successfully prevent the landslide effect of distrust on the pandemic and also the infodemic. At the onset, for example, the mask and other PPE become very scarce, and the government, to restore balance, introduced a rationing system in a timely fashion. But selling masks was not enough. The preventive measure against the disease would be effective only if the majority of people were willing to properly wear them and wash their hands. So who executed the plan? That over 6,000 pharmacists, each having not only professional image, but also engagement in the communities, seemed the best candidate. Yet not everything can be achieved simply by publicly trusted pharmacists. For them, running this initiative is an extra chore that could affect the usual dispensing business for them. So the CECC, or Central Epidemic Command Center, did not issue direct orders forcing pharmacists to comply in any particular way. On the other hand, we just kept this open loop of interaction so that the mass rationing system is based on the experience of retrieving prescription renewable prescriptions for chronic diseases, which flattened the learning curve for everyone, and also allow pharmacists to come up with their own innovations, such as limited hour sales, take a number system, so on. And with such incentives, they integrated very well with the civic technology community. So the civic technologists become like civil engineers, using the mask maps and so on, empowering more than half a population on the first week only to just get more availability into the mask in stock. And also it provides space for mutual participation so that people can complement each other with new ideas to win back more social trust. All they have to do is call this toll-free number 1922 and see their ideas being broadcasted on the very next day by the Quint, the National Medical Officers team, including our Minister of Health and Welfare. And so I just want to share one story before closing up. There has been cases where a nightclub employee were diagnosed with COVID-19. And we can imagine in special spaces like this, those guests and employees are particularly sensitive to privacy, a core value. But in terms of public health and prevention, failing to provide reliable contact tracing information will lead to significant vulnerabilities. But the CECC did not invoke sanctions or order nightclubs to close down, to quarantine, and so on. Such measure, of course, strengthened the so-called public health idea, but it also strengthened the stigma society already attached to relevant workers, just like during prohibition. And so the expert at CECC did nothing like that sort, but rather just explained the epidemiology behind it in an online MOOC, massive online course, powered by our VP, Vice President Chen Jianren, the author of the epidemiology textbooks. And they devised a practical real contact system as long as people could be effectively contacted. For example, we'll throw way of emails and so on. No real names were necessary. Again, internet-powered social innovation. So we also clearly explained the scientific crux, which is physical distancing, droplet infection prevention, and so on. And as long as business could achieve this, local government could open it up. And as a result, they developed many creative approaches, leaving code names, single-use emails, prepaid mobile numbers, wearing hats with plastic shield to maintain physical distancing, and so on. So even nightclubs could join the pandemic fighting national team. And that is how we garnered the social trust during the pandemic prevention. So I don't naively believe, of course, that the world will magically become a better place as long as everybody have internet access with good intentions. But the internet does have an advantage of not having to maintain physical distancing. And it also allows all footprints to remain, and therefore piece of trust could be connected. Kind acts, often small, could be encouraged through this kind of co-creation. And so I would just close with a quote, love your neighbor as yourself. And perhaps because neighbors are not strangers, it may not be difficult even during the pandemic. In the digital world where information travels on speed of light, distance doesn't separate us. And so the pandemic may have temporarily distanced us from the family and the friends, but it also brought it extremely close to strangers. It's everyone's business with everyone's help. And the government can start by trusting the end users, that's to say, the citizens.
Thank you very much, Audrey. A lot of food for thought there for people. We'll go straight to our second speaker, Mr. Harish Pillay. Harish, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Harish. I'm based out of Singapore. I'm speaking from an industry perspective, I guess. I've been in the open source world and the internet world for years. And I've seen how the internet itself has been productive for many of the things that I needed to do, as well as for people around me and even the businesses that I've been part of. So when we look at this scenario that we are facing today, from my perspective, at least from the organization I'm with, by default, we are about 40% remote in normal times, or as some people have started saying, the before times. But what has happened in the last X number of months is that we have all become 100% remote. Now, for the most part, most of us adapted it, just like what ducks to water. It was not a problem at all. It just went on just fine. There was some individuals that had challenges because they never really needed to work remote for any reason. So they also had other challenges in terms of not being able to set it up at home, and having to share resources. Even I myself, although I have some luxury of having a room, but occasionally the room is occupied, and I need to do hot desking in the house itself. So talk about hot desking in the office. This is hot desking at home. So trying to figure out and work through some of these nuances. But that is one part of the story. I think the bigger part of the story is, given the fact that we have internet connectivity and we have the ability to do what we are doing today, there are things that we should try and innovate on in using exactly the same tech. And one example that I would probably propose for everybody to consider, and we can have a discussion about it, is when you have events like, for example, the event that we're having now, in this case, it's a webinar, so it's a slightly different context. But when you have meetings online and so on, try to make sure, and this is what we have done, try to make sure that every meeting that you have is planned for an hour, but only the first half hour is of any substance. The second half hour of that 1 hour meeting is to tidy up anything that is left out and have, wrap up, do minutes and stuff like that. And this way, you have the ability to breathe in between meetings, because what has happened, I feel, is a lot of us have taken the advantage of the fact that I don't have to move from room to room. It's just one click away to the next event. And so the possibility of having meetings at any time becomes increasingly the case. And that puts a huge challenge on how we manage our own times. So this is a simple suggestion, and this has worked dramatically for my team and across the organization I'm part of, because it forces all of us to say, okay, when you have a meeting, you must have an agenda. If you don't have an agenda, you don't have a meeting. End of story. So it's just like they say, if there's no picture, it doesn't happen, right? So the same way, if there is no agenda, there's no meeting. So you must have an agenda, and you stick to it. No deviations, stick to it. And so this allows us to adapt to this scenario. But clearly, this does suggest that it's a different type of discipline that we get into. And I think, having said all of this, it'll be a bit of a challenge now to go back to the older way, the before times way of doing stuff, because there was a lot more leeway, a lot of buffer, a lot of other things that came into play. And we may have to readapt to working in a less productive manner. I find that I'm more productive now, but I think chances are we may find that this becomes a little bit less productive when you go back to the other way of doing stuff. So with that, I'll end here and I hand over to the next speaker. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you very much, Harish. Our third speaker today is Mr. Vashkar Bhattacharjee. And Vashkar, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sounding good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me in this very important opening panel. I'm just representing 1 billion people who have some form of disability in the world, and 65% of them are living in Asia Pacific region. Friends, among them, 80% are the poorest of the poor. So my kind of persons with disabilities, when there is a pandemic, they're in a real trouble. Just I am requesting you, all of you, please close your eye for only 10 seconds. Please close your eye and try to realize if there is a pandemic like Corona, who will support us? How we'll go to the hospital? How we'll get the information? How we able to overcome these situations? Where we are talking about the social distance. Believe me, I was in a panic. My community in a panic. Many countries have no answer how to support the people with disabilities in these pandemics. Regarding internet, there is 2 challenges. One, affordability of internet and technology. Another is the accessibility. So we find dependency of technology and the internet also a barrier for persons with disabilities who are living in a rural part of the countries. But within that, we are progressing. We are going far. We are surviving because these days we are overcoming disability by using technology, by using internet, and we are trying to make it accessible. I can give you some example. In Bangladesh, we have created number of multimedia talking books, which are full text, full audio multimedia talking book. People can listen, people can read, then they can get the information on the Corona, COVID-19. Same time, we have developed sign language video, and also we have tried to make our government service such as National Helpline and also covid.gov.bd accessible for all. So we are very much committed to make our service inclusive and accessible. In these regards, we need support from the policymakers, internet providers, technology makers, innovators. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe one day we'll overcome this challenge. In that day, we'll get a new normal situations where everyone can enjoy their life. All people, including people with disabilities, will get the equal access in internet, equal access in the service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vashkar. And thank you to Audrey and Harish and Vashkar for starting off a really interesting and important conversation. In all the time that I've been alive, which is starting to add up a little bit, I cannot remember at an event, if you think of the pandemic as an event, that has had such a profound impact on so many people in the same way. And this open internet environment and social media world to allow a shared discussion of it. So it's an absolutely fascinating time to be thinking about the intersection of this technology that we are all using all the time and this health issue in a way that's it's quite remarkable. So I hope that these provocations from our speakers have got you with some questions. I don't see any questions at the moment in the Q&A box, but I would welcome some questions there to start directing. and or some hands up in the participants list to do the same. And I know that people sometimes take a little bit of time to warm up to those questions. And so I guess I'll start with a cheat way of doing it, which is to ask Audrey or Harish or Vashkar if any of you have questions for each other based on what you've said. Are there any things coming to mind? I'll go back through the. I'll start with you, Audrey. Is there any question you've got arising from the other two presentations?
Yeah, certainly, and I will speak slower this time.
Thank you.
The entire mask rationing journey in Taiwan started, of course, with the map, but immediately we received people with seeing difficulties request that this are made into chatbots or into voice assistants and so on to increase the accessibility. And because we have this API first idea of government procurement, meaning that if any vendor makes a system that's only useful through its default interface and not for machines, they then could be disqualified from procurement tenders simply because they discriminate against robots. We don't quite say that, but it's the same thing. And so that's why all sort of more than 140 applications are made almost immediately, because the initial map doesn't work in a map-only fashion, but rather speaks Open API, a Linux Foundation standard. And so my main curiosity is whether this API first or a open system, open interface first principle have helped you in delivering accessibility and inclusion for any the pandemic related services similar to our map example.
Great.
If
Thank you,
allow
Audrey.
me.
Yeah, Vashkar, go ahead.
So what I understand in our region, we immediately required some policy and standard to ensure the accessible and barrier-free internet for all. So inclusive internet governance is very, very important to overcome these types of pandemics, because we are finding that there is many services are coming, e-service, as community is moving towards digitalization. So this e-service, such as applications, are not really accessible for all types of people with disabilities. Believe me, people with disabilities means there is a diversity. There is a different kind of people with disabilities and different abilities. So we need to understand the accessibility needs of all. So that's why we required some common standard, accessibility standard in our region, even though there is a global standard such as W3C or DAISY, etc. But we need to adopt it for our Asia Pacific region, especially country like Bangladesh and a developing world. Thank you.
Thank you, Vashkar. Harish, did you have anything inspired by your fellow speakers or to add?
Yeah, I think I like the idea of the open API. I think one of the challenge when you find, well, I guess I should speak slower. One of the things I'm sure you will find is that there are a lot of good intentions across the board to create solutions and so on. And two things that needs to happen for those kinds of initiatives: they must be opened up and available as either open source code, free open source software licensed, but failing which, at least an open API. So I think I like that idea of the open API, and I think that's clearly a big win in many ways, because you actually bring forward a way to be inclusive, a way to be positively bringing people on board, so that they can take the data as you present. I think the challenge would be, as things get to be, as we come to the tail end of this entire pandemic, would those initiatives continue? Will they be sustainable for the longer term? That would be my question to, perhaps even to Audrey. I mean, the kind of stuff that in Taiwan it has been done, do you think that would pose a problem in a long-term perspective, long-term sustainability perspective? Over to you.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, we're just moderating ourselves then. Okay. I think it's a really interesting effect of the pandemic in that previously in Taiwan, we're definitely not a utopia, even though we've been 5 months without a locally confirmed case. In Taiwan, politics or governance previously has a lot of fiercely contested, like party politics, domestic pressure, especially because of Taiwan's international activity limitations and so on. But just before the fiercely contested election this year, there's a survey that shows regardless of people's political sides, the public has a high degree of recognition for any form of deepening the democracy beyond just uploading 3 bits every 4 years, which is called voting, and also a international connection to international communities. It's just each side was accusing the other side not doing these two enough, but these two are the shared values by all the Taiwanese people. And so we think that because of the engagement of global communities, such as, say, the OpenStreetMap community, when making the mask availability map and so on, it's even lifted to the parliamentary level when there was a legislator, Hong Angao, who served as VP of Data Analytics at Foxconn, so she knows something about data. And then she cited the data from the OpenStreetMap community, the Jiu Ping'an map, and interpolated Minister Chen of Health and Welfare, pointing out that our map looks fair, but only on a kilometer on the surface of Earth sense. But if you take care of the OpenStreetMap public transportation, the actual hours it takes to reach the point of mask dispense, then it's actually very unequal. And the prestigious, at the time, Minister Chen did not defend the policy. Instead, he said, legislator, teach us. And then we work together the very next day to start working on 24-hour convenience store partnerships and so on. So legislator Gao praised afterwards, saying interpolation yesterday become the improvement today. And this, I think, just links in with the deepening of democracy and connecting with international open communities landscape. And that really helped us to become more democratic while fighting the pandemic and not less democratic.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. We do have a couple of questions down in the box. So I'll ask first from Anriette Esterhuysen. Anriette, so you are on the call. So would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like me to do it? I'm happy either way. And I'll take silence as me doing it on your behalf. So Anriette's question, and I think it's to any or all of you, is, do you think we need to change anything in how we do internet governance in response to the current crisis? Would any of you like to tackle that question? Has anyone got a view of the three?
I'll take this. This is Harish.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there is no need for any change per se. I just would think that we need to have a more deliberate thinking behind it and always work on the assumption that things will be remote. And when things are remote, what would that mean from a governance perspective? Because if you default to a in-person kind of scenario, in-person kind of way of doing things in a larger group, has got a different set of engagement models. When it is 100% remote, I don't know where you are, but I'm helping you to get to a certain point. I think it changes how you approach problem solving, because that's exactly how, again, I'm going back to some of my roots, which is in the open source community. You don't see the developer, the other side of the keyboard, wherever in the world the person may be, and you have no idea. So you develop a model of engagement, a way to communicate and miscommunicate for that matter, but the ability to correct and self-correct and move forward. So I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned in the open source world because everything is done remotely, and we can continue to adapt and modify it as necessary for this internet governance perspective, because it transcends this. It solves the same problem, but with a slightly different focal area. So I think there's not much to be changed, but I think there are things that we may have to relook and say, what are the assumptions where we had if this was done in person as opposed to be done in a remote manner.
Thanks, Harish. I see Audrey nodding a bit. Audrey or Vashkar, do you have anything to add on that one?
One thing I would like to add, in these pandemics, we saw that the discrimination has increased. Even though when we are talking about the education, some people are getting education through digital means, but maximum are not. In my country, like people with disabilities are fully excluded from the education because they are in a special education system where is no technology has used, no internet has used. That's why we are seeing that people with disabilities, children with disabilities, students with disabilities are discriminated when it came to the question of education. So we need a change, and change is we need to consider the most vulnerable groups when we are designing our service, when we are talking about the internet governance or other electronic means of communications. We must keep in mind that there is a groups who need the special attention. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just share a very simple project we did along with the AIT, the de facto US embassy in Taiwan, with 7 countries and 53 teams on what we call the co-hack. The whole co-hack is, well, just like any entirely online hackathon, looking for people to contribute to counter COVID innovations. But I think with a very different configuration in that instead of consulting representatives of so-called end users, we first engage the internet community using an AI-based conversation system called Polis that makes it much easier for people to surface their common values despite their very different positions. So for example, there may be a lot of value debate at a time on whether a tool that allows people to prioritize ICU, care resource is ethical or not. And of course, the tool works very well to highlight this controversy, but it also highlights that there are common values. For example, people who work with contact tracers really do not want to reveal more than necessary information about friends and family. So a digital diary that can help them anonymize and pseudonymize themselves more is actually preferred to any of those contact tracing apps, because an app that enhance rather than decrease privacy is actually a common value regardless of jurisdiction, but you don't hear about it a lot unless you run this kind of assisted intelligence listening at scale conversations. So running such conversations before making any architectural changes or designing any applications, prioritizing end users, similar to a recent RFC from the Internet Architecture Board, the 8890 one, I think is essential. And we can also include more people's voices if people understand that their rough consensus has a binding power on the kind of programs that the government will fund and support.
Thank you. That's a nice set of answers there. I'm going to go to a live question, and that's to ask for Winston Roberts to take the floor and ask a question of 1, 2, or 3 speakers. Winston, please unmute yourself and have a go.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. My question was really in answer to somebody else who, I think it was Anriette, who said, is there a need to do internet governance differently in response to the current crisis? My thought was perhaps not doing governance differently, but maybe reorienting the internet governance or the program to help it to meet the SDG goals in a different way, because the SDG goals were fixed 10 years ago before this crisis was thought of. And it's clearly off track towards the SDGs. We're off track. So perhaps we could organize some sort of high-level meeting that would explain, bring together various learnings from the way the internet has been used to respond to COVID-19, and then use those learnings to adjust the path towards SDG programs in 2030. That was, sorry, a long, complicated question, but I think it's I think you understand it's in essence a simple problem. How can we get back on track? Thanks.
Thanks, Winston. It's sort of almost not quite a comment dressed up as a question, but hopefully thought-provoking for our speakers. Audrey or Vashkar or Harish, do you have any further comment in response to Winston's point?
I see the SDGs more as kind of a shared vocabulary, so that when people want to do social or environmental good, they can exchange their best or at least better practice, or at least different practices using a common vocabulary. In that sense, I think the SDGs are still very useful as sort of like 17 chat channels and hashtags for people to exchange the best practices. But it is true that the original formulation of the SDGs, especially around the health and the industrial innovation around open government, that's 16, and also all the different ways has been changed on the pathway to get to those goals. So the goals may be the same, but the pathways, because of pandemic, invention by necessity is much more prominent. So I often in my talks talk about the actual targets in the SDG 17 and say it looks very different now as compared to even 1 year ago, when we say that we need to build reliable data, we need to build effective partnerships, we need to build open innovation and so on. This is not just for least developed countries and small islands, developing states, as originally stated in the text of 1718. Because of pandemic, we're all small island developing states in a sense. Islands, at least in that sense. And so we need really to look more deeply into the text of the 17th goal and just write them in the post-pandemic hindsight of 2020, and then starting from the 17th goal, radiate back to the other 16 SDGs. So I fully support that idea, and in fact, it's also why in Taiwan the annual presidential hackathon after the COVID this time, we're beginning next year's presidential hackathon, not focusing on all the 17 SDGs at once, but focusing on the 17th SDG, like changing the way people collaborate and form partnerships as our main topic next year.
Thanks, Audrey. And Vashkar, did you want to add something there?
Only thing, firstly, thank you very much for bringing these issues, SDG issues in this discussion. You know, this is the first international global goal where disability is seen as one of the core issues, and in principle is no one left behind. Yes, if we are seeing that is required some kind of adjustment with the and we need to relook the SDG within this pandemic, and I believe if we could properly implement the SDG, then many of our questions will be answered and our rights will be addressed.
Thank you. And Harish, did you have something on this one as well?
Yeah, I thought it's good to introduce additional SDG, as Audrey was saying, and focusing on how you do things across all the others. There will be this element that you need to have to think about, and you know, I think it's a good idea to do it, and we need to craft it and verbalize it and write it up in a manner that is able to be actually executed in some sense. It's a higher goal, but I think it's something that's eminently useful and doable. So I like that idea. Thanks, Audrey, for that.
Okay, let's take one of the written, thank you, Winston. Let's go to one of the written questions that was asked by Joyce Chen. And this is for any or all of you. What do you envision the new normal will be like for businesses and end users? Do you see a continuation of how things are now, or will we behave differently? What do you think?
I'll take this. I think, yes, we will behave differently. I'm very sure. There will be a portion of the population across the world that will probably get into the older ways of doing stuff, the before times. But I think as we get this into a normal way of doing things, we probably would adapt differently. So I suspect this will continue to be the norm. There'll be greater understanding that, you know, has to be a balance in many areas, because I think the previous ways of doing stuff was skewed in a particular direction, good or bad. but and one global switch caused every one of us to have experience in the same scenario at the same time. And so how would you manage that? So I think each of us have adapted differently, but on the whole, I think it will be more or less the same with some tweaks to accommodate the fact that, oh, there is an office, oh, there is a place I can go to, but over a period of time, I'm sure people, we will, this benefit that we've gotten now, whatever benefit that might be, will probably go down in terms of value, and you find that, oh, I'd rather go to a location and have a meetup than otherwise. So it's a long haul thing, I would say.
Yeah, I think Taiwan may serve as a preview of a new normal, not only because we're recording GDP growth for this quarter and for the year, and it's been 5 months with no local cases. We've opened the baseball games and large gatherings such as the concerts with tens of thousands of people in the audience wearing masks. But even though the economic activity seems to be back to normal, the social solidarity is not normal at all. It's a new normal that people feel much more close together. People understand the idea that exclusion is to everyone's detriment. The political bickerings between partisanship, as I mentioned in my opening, it's much lower, much more muted. And also more importantly, I think, is this experience of people using the internet for things they have not imagined before, especially for decision makers. The more elderly people, they had the experience with teleconferencing and virtual reality. It was just very bad experience in their youth. And so they shy away from it. But because of the very brief month or two that they had to connect using their browsers and their phones, and they discover it's actually a piece of cake now. It's actually easy now. It's actually lifelike and much more lively than if both sides have to wear a mask. So compare favorably even to face-to-face meetings. And we see a lot of the culture change because of that for digital adoption. And also there's less kind of vanity-induced social media. It's seen not cool now anymore to kind of show off on social media when so many people are still suffering. So the social fabric really has changed, even though economy seems to be back to normal here.
Vashkar.
So, in my opinion, is nothing about us without us. I think in this new normal situation will give us more internet dependency. Then it will reduce the inaccessibility. As a person with visual disability, currently I am not able to travel alone as the social distancing is and we don't have any accessibility in our region. So internet dependency sometimes can give us more freedom. Involve, engage, and contribute.
Thanks, Vashkar. And I'll just add one thing from my point of view as moderator's privilege. The thing that I like in this overall terrible context of the pandemic is that the just assumption of being in the office 9 to 5 is gone. And so you have flexibility of being, sometimes you can choose whether to do an online session or an in-person one. And I hope that as we get on top of the virus, we can choose to make our in-person gatherings really meaningful and really good and connecting and sort of nourishing our spirits, if you like, compared to this plain old transactional stuff. And just being able to choose whether to be in the office or at work, I hope that doesn't go back to the old way, just personally.
And if I may add something to that, Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead,
if I may, because one of the things that people lamented is that when you don't get the chance to be in an office or environment like that, you don't have the opportunity to have the serendipitous kind of meetings with people, at the pantry or at the corridors or at the lift lobby or wherever, and having that conversation, whatever the conversation may be. So how do you do that in an environment where everybody's remote? So one of the things that I have done with my colleagues in Red Hat is we introduced an idea of an office hours. What it means is we have 2 slots. It's up to you. There's nothing hard and fast. I chose this model, which is a half hour in the morning and a half hour in the afternoon. So between 11:30 and noon my time and 2:30 and 3 my time, I will be turning on, or I'll be connected to my video conferencing tool, and I'll mute myself, both video and audio, but whoever wants to drop in just goes there and clicks in and drops in and says hi, and we have a chat. It's no different from you walk past somebody at a in a cubicle or in the pantry, or you just say hi and you have a 1 minute session and then off you go. So the idea here is to give the opportunity to have something that happens randomly, but using the same tools that we are stuck with having to use. So trying to think a little bit out of the box from that perspective and say, okay, what can I do? So encouraging people to just add this into their calendar, so I can just drop in wherever you are and say hi. If you're not there, you're not there. It's just like you go past a cubicle and you're not there, you're not there. That's fine, right? So it's a more of a ad hoc, accidental meetups kind of thing.
Nice, thanks. That's a good tip. I'm going to take a second verbal question. Felix Arokia Raj, you've had your hand up for a long time, so thank you for your patience. Please ask away.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Felix Arokia Raj. I'm working as a faculty in technical education. It's my privilege to join you in this morning talk. And,
Felix, I can't hear you, Felix.
Yeah, could you speak up, please, or turn your microphone up?
Am I audible now?
That's better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Today morning, I had a news, Odisha state government. It is a state in the southern part of India. And Odisha state government is experimenting with a 15 minutes time slot through radio for school education kids. So that in this 15 minutes each day, a particular subject will be taught, especially when 75 to 80% of the students are from rural part of their state. And this is an experimental phase. When we are talking about the sustainability goals and interconnectivity of quality education, goal number 4, with the most of the other goals, I want to have this question. Does anybody know that any survey or any research on how is this digital divide impacting in this lockdown period, especially for achieving the goal 4 of quality education? Thank you.
Can I answer that, Felix?
Sure.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Felix, yeah, so I give you an example that happened, a situation here in Singapore, when the schools had to go, work from learn from home. One of the things that we noticed is, this is still Singapore, right? So the assumption was, everybody has something. But the reality is that the statistics show that we have almost like 95%, 99% internet access enabled devices and so on and so forth at homes and so on. So in theory, the students should be able to get to the classes. But that statistic did not distinguish between those who have a laptop and a mobile phone. And what we found out was, as a result of that, was that there was a significant percentage of homes that actually do not have a laptop. They have a mobile phone enabled access, but that was absolutely unhelpful from a teaching perspective. So from the student's perspective, you just had this smaller screen and you don't have a proper keyboard, you don't have any other means. And that became a big challenge. And that was a realization that I felt that, we should have anticipated something like that a long time ago, but we didn't. And so now we are reacting, at least in the Singapore context, to try and fix that problem so that we get students, if they don't have any other connectivity, as it were, devices, is to get them laptops, because you minimally need something that has got a keyboard. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do anything useful just with a screen. So I think that was the part of the challenge from a learning perspective that we noticed during the lockdown.
Thanks, Harish. Audrey or Vashkar, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just say something about the idea. We were talking about the texts in the SDGs. So in the SDG 4.7, it talks about of course, the importance of promoting sustainable development and the proposed indicator, for example, about in literacy and mathematics that could be developed connecting the digital to the sustainable. But in Taiwan, we found that the focus on literacy is archaic because it presupposes a radio or television-like relationship between the information producers or data producers and the information consumers, right? That's where the media literacy came from. So we, starting last year, rename it the whole curriculum to replace literacy with competence. So now we talk about data competence, media competence, and so on. The ability to produce media, to produce data, to curate data, basically. And instead of like treating people in less connected places as someone who need to earn literacy classes, using like digital companion programs in the Ministry of Education, we made sure to connect each student willing to be e-tutored by a undergrad level student in municipal areas. So the two of them are in a more balanced relationship. It's not about the more connected undergrads have to tutor the younger middle school age rural area people anything. It's more like introducing communities here so that their narratives, their data, their media, and so on could be understood and amplified to a wider sector of people, especially the social sector and so on, without having this one directional, like standardized answer and so on. So it's also a mentality change when we treat end users as end users. That's a literacy perspective. But if we see them as co-creators, then that's a competence narrative. And it really affects how very young children approach sustainability and digital transformation.
Oh, Vashkar, do you have anything on this one?
Just only for your information, you know, in our country also, government have dedicated a television channel for broadcasting educational content, and same time also we are doing some radio program, and community radio also playing a vital role. But unfortunately, you know, when we are talking about the children with disabilities, there is some of them are missing because of their disabilities, such as children with hearing and speech disability, children with neurodevelopment disability. So it is still a challenge for accommodating all of the children in education and to achieve the SDG goal 4.
Thanks, Vashkar. And that's our just under 3 minutes bell. So super quick responses to one last question. Since this is from Sherry Lagakali. Since this is becoming a new normal, how can we ensure that we are not overwhelmed with information overload, misinformation, endless Zoom calls and meetings during the COVID-19 era? Quick 30 seconds from each of you. Who wants to go first? Audrey.
All right, I can go first. I reply to emails using the Pomodoro method. So I work for 25 minutes without any distraction, and then only limit my social media and email to the 5 minutes. It really helps.
Nice, thanks. Vashkar, how about you?
I think my life became a little bit easier because, you know, I don't need to move anywhere. I can use the internet, Zoom and other platform. Only we need the accessibility. If there is accessibility can be ensured, then for me, it is good.
Nice. And Harish?
So my 30 seconds would be the same thing with using Pomodoro to control your timing. But more importantly, what we did was to make sure that meetings are no more than half an hour, but you block out 1 hour. So it gives you the second half hour to do whatever else you want. And no team meetings on Fridays. The Friday, the whole day is off. So we try to encourage our customers as well, nothing. So that you actually have one day to do whatever else that you think you want to do.
Day of sanity break. My own experience here was going in the first couple of weeks of the lockdown from about 6 hours of Zoom meetings a day to about 3 hours of Zoom meetings a day and 3 hours of phone calls. And actually sometimes no video and walking around while you're talking makes a major difference as well. I also love that idea of no meetings on Friday.
No meetings Friday. Look, it works very well for us.
Yeah, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy it. Look, Audrey, Harish, and Vashkar, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you all to the participants and questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of them. And now with 35 seconds left, I'm going to hand back to Jen to close out this opening plenary for APrIGF 2020.
Thank you, Jordan. And thank you, speakers, panelists, for such a warm and engaging conversation. We'd like to thank our sponsors, of course, to make that makes the APrIGF possible. We'd like to highlight that APrIGF, the global IGF, and many other national and regional initiatives are supported by funding from the IGFSA. Please support the global IGF movement by going to igfsa.give.asia to show your support. Finally, please remember to participate in our synthesis document process. Go to comment.aprigf.asia to leave your inputs, and remember to join us during our town hall sessions tomorrow on the 29th and the 30th of September to make your voice heard. Everybody, please have a happy and productive APrIGF 2020.